Hello, everybody, and welcome to our guest session to the Supervisor Sync community. We have a very special guest with us that I'm really excited to hear more from and to hear how he works. His name is Jared DePasquale, and Jared, welcome.
Hey, thanks, John. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Jared, I could rattle off some credits for you, but kind of tell us what you do.
Yeah, I'm a score guy. I was the kid that at 7 years old saw Star Wars in the movie theater. And, even though I was still a long way off from starting a musical journey, that was kind of the first moment of aha for me, of knowing what I wanted to do. And I wanted to write music that would go to stories, to media stories, film or whatever media it was. And it's just kind of been a slow, ramp to learn how to do it and do it well.
So you started off with that. You wanted
Well,
to score.
yeah, it's kind of
Interesting.
weird. It wasn't like cognitive. My folks didn't really listen to music in the house. I just didn't have music around.
Hmm.
And so 7 years old was sort of like the first musical experience I had. And it impacted me. It impacted so many musicians and, people, filmmakers or
Yeah.
would-be filmmakers. And so even though Eddie Van Halen would be the reason I play guitar as a kid in high school, John Williams would be the reason I loved music. He kind of
Yeah.
like started my heart beating.
Really?
Definitely,
Huh.
man. I mean, me
Okay.
and about a million other composers, but
Yeah. Yeah. And you were 7 years old and you knew you had a true north of like,
yeah. I mean, I
uh,
didn't. I wouldn't have been the kid that said, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I would have been.
right.
I wouldn't have been seven saying like, "I want to write music for movies," but I was like, that sound is in my head all the time. When I'm riding my bike,
Yeah.
I hear John Williams. When I'm in the woods dreaming of spooky stories, I hear, it was just,
Yeah.
it was infusing.
Yeah. I love that.
And then it would be years later that I would go, oh, that's what I want to do.
Yeah. And you grew up as a guitar player originally, right?
Yeah,
Pre
yeah,
pre composer, pre producer.
yeah, yeah. Although I always say that, I started playing guitar in high school really because I stopped playing baseball. I was this baseball fanatic kid, and all of a sudden I just stopped. I didn't try out. And I
Hmm.
think my mom knew that a bored high school kid is probably the worst thing that can happen,
Right.
you know? And so my mom was like, "Hey, if I pay for guitar lessons, would you take them?" And that just so happened that I had discovered Van Halen's
Right.
music. And so it was sort of like guitar, Van Halen. This is fun.
Yeah.
And so that would be why I played. But it was funny because guitar for me was really about finding my own voice and about, even though I like to learn everybody's riffs, I wanted to write my own riff. I
Yeah.
wanted to be the guy that wrote a riff that the next generation of kiddos would want to play.
Yeah.
So
Were
guitar
you
was more of like a creative avenue more than a virtuosic,
yeah.
you know.
Were you better? And we'll talk about Van Halen a little bit more because I know you and I have that
Yeah,
same
we have that in
DNA.
common.
Were you more of hey, I want to create my own thing, or an imitator? I'm better at imitating people.
Well, that's a great question because
You know what I mean? Some people are really good imitators.
imitation is a really important trait to have to a degree, but it also can become a prison. For me, I was a good imitator. I was a good imitator of a lot of things,
Right.
especially as a young composer. And that's ultimately what got me work. And it's what got me hired to become a ghostwriter
Yeah.
for the gentleman I worked for, is that I could imitate a lot. I could
Yeah.
listen to a piece of music and I could understand what makes it tick.
Right.
So the biggest
And
part
I'm
of
not saying it's bad being imitated. I mean,
no,
there is a time to imitate and to
well,
figure other
there,
people's
there
processes out.
is.
Right.
And I think ultimately for me, the biggest part of my journey was figuring out how to be me.
Yeah.
And it's taken, I'm not going to lie, it's taken 25 years for me to figure out,
Totally get it.
who am I? What do I have to say? How can I kind of honor my influences,
Yeah.
but still pursue something that I feel is artistically satisfying?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so the same would be true for guitar. There were a lot of guitar players I could imitate, and you would go, "Oh man, your phrasing really sounds like so and so."
Right.
Then all of a sudden, I'm like, "My gosh, well, who am I? If I don't
Yeah.
have anything to say, this stinks.
And who cares? Like if you're the 400th best
Who cares?
Pat Metheny clone or Van Halen clone, it's like,
Who cares?"
okay, you got to get in the game sometime. So you might
Yeah,
as well stand on your own feet.
Yeah,
sooner rather than later.
totally. You know, it's funny.
You know?
Rolling Stone once they put out this thing of like the 100 best guitar players of all time, and you could argue the list whether it's valid or not. But
Sure.
they had it like grouped into like shredders, super shredders, blues guys, and innovators. And it was funny because all of the guitar players I liked fell into the innovator category.
Huh, interesting.
And so it's important. It's like you don't have to be the best, but have something to say. Have something to say that's your own. You know?
Yeah, it's funny because those kind of originals, those forces of nature, the Zappas, the Pat Metheny's, the people that came out of the chute just being themselves. Van Halen was like that too.
Yeah, Eddie's like that.
But it's like those are the people. It's like the originals.
Yeah,
they're not trying to be chameleons or squishy. They're like, this is my voice. This is what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of Van Halen, what was kind of what records meant the most to you growing up? What were your?
Well, you know, it's funny because I have this saying that like the power of the first mention. I feel like the power of the first mention is so important for, you know, whether you're a kid, they hear your version.
Tell me what that is.
Well, like, you know, for most children, the first mention is going to be from their parents, whether it's the lens of religion or the lens of politics or the lens of money. And that is going to be how, you know, if your parents are affiliated with a certain political party, you will have that leaning just because they were the first ones to say it.
Yeah. Okay.
And for me, Diver Down was that's the record that was out when I discovered Van Halen. And so I have this leaning to Diver Down. Right. Fair Warning would become my favorite record of all time for Van Halen. I loved the tenacity of that. But again, Diver Down. So I showed what record do I show my kids when it was time to show them Van Halen? I showed them Diver Down.
Yeah. I love that.
So the power of the first mention for them becomes the same thing for me, you know?
Yeah. That's great. A lot of people kind of poo-poo Diver Down.
I can understand why.
And I mean, yes, it's like what, 28 minutes long?
Sure.
It's
a lot of cover tunes.
Not a long record. But if you weight it, you know, with, you know, music nowadays or however you want to weight things, it's like there are some Hang 'em High on that.
Hang 'em High. My little son thinks that riff's the coolest riff in the world.
Cathedral.
Yeah, it's so cool.
I mean, it's like if you just take those two songs, it's like, dude, those are brilliant secrets.
Yeah.
I mean, those are classic. And a lot of people miss, to me, the thing beyond all the whammy bar tapping, blah, 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 spandex pants, whatever, the Jack Daniels bass. The thing people miss the most, and that I think is the differentiator for Van Halen, is their songs.
Yeah.
They wrote songs when people were just writing riffs.
Yeah.
And writing excuses to solo.
Right.
You know, those songs hold up. Secrets. Yep. I mean, Hang 'em High, Secrets, they're just fantastic compositions that nobody talks about. They're like, oh, well, Eddie did this for 30 years. And it's like, well, yeah, but he built a foundation of songs that really hold up through time. So
totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah, so you're Diver Down, Fair Warning.
Yeah, that's me. I wasn't much of the Hagar era.
No, dude, I'm with you.
it kind of lost me, and I've never even acknowledged that to my children. So it's not even part of canon, I guess.
Canon, yes, I'm with you.
So
I'm with and we'll get off Van Halen.
Yeah, we'll get off Van Halen. It's not fair. It's not.
When we got married, when Rob and I got married, she was not aware of Van Halen at all.
Nor was my wife.
So we did this thing called Van Halen School, where we'd talk about one thing for, I don't know, it was kind of funny, but that's good. Yeah, those records, it's funny how much they hold up.
Yeah, they still hold up.
And Ted Templeman and Don Landee, I think played a larger role than people give them credit for.
Absolutely. Yeah,
that's great. So coming up with guitar and becoming a scoring composer, those are like very different DNA headspaces. How did you go from guitar guy into John Williams land? What was that path like for you?
Yeah, you know, like I said, I started guitar in high school. So, you know, for music, that's late to the game. I mean, when you're talking about like an actual traditional classical background, you're very late to the game.
Yeah.
But I worked hard like a lot of probably kids did when they started playing guitar, and they loved it. I just, my studies were horrible. I did not do well in school. I practiced all the time.
Hmm.
And so, I suppose I acquired a certain level of skill quickly.
Mhm.
And pretty quickly, when kids started to talk about college, I started to talk about music school, which was a very foreign concept to my folks who, my mom didn't go to college. My dad did night school. Like, I didn't come from I'm a family of Italian immigrants. I didn't come from school. Yeah, right. And so for me to have the opportunity to go to college was a big deal. And all of a sudden, music school and a degree of music is like, what? That's not really what we were
Right,
thinking.
right.
But I fought them. I fought tooth and nail, and they knew I was serious. They knew I was a hard worker. I was a good kid. Like, I worked hard.
Yeah. And you're
And so
from Chicago?
Connecticut. I grew up
Connecticut.
in,
Okay. Wow.
from New York and Connecticut.
Hmm.
And so anyway, I got into a music school in Pittsburgh as a guitar major, but at that time, they didn't offer all of the amazing things they offer now in music school. It was a jazz major or as a classical major,
Right.
and that was it. And I wanted neither.
Right.
Jazz just, it wasn't my thing. I just
Yeah.
knew it wasn't. But I had to go that
century.
route. What's that?
Wrong century.
Yeah, for some people they love it. So
Yeah.
but I just, I went to music school to hopefully find my band, to find the guys that I would find a band in, and then I would leave music school and go play in a band. But that didn't happen, just because music school was so you get into a practice room and you isolate, and there wasn't a lot of community, there wasn't a lot of jamming, there wasn't anything social about it. It was sort of isolate and play. And that's what I did. And I didn't really dig it.
Yeah.
I was like, just making music by yourself, practicing scales just wasn't all that fun.
Yeah.
But my roommate had a ton of music gear. I mean, his dad had just bought so much music gear. And this kid, my roommate, would go away on the weekends. And so I started to ask him, hey, man, would you mind if I turn on your gear when you're off? And so I turned on his gear, man, and I started to write. It was all the technology of the day. And so I would write basically from Friday. Once classes got out on Friday, I would write straight through to Sunday night, and then I would go to class on Monday morning. So, I would get like 30 hours of writing in every weekend.
Yeah.
And it was through that process that I started to see a turn in what I wanted to do. That guitar was just like a tool I would have, but it wouldn't be the means to which I wanted to make a living. I wanted to write, and I wanted to arrange, you know. And then I was also fortunate at that time. There was just so many cool film scores that were being released, movies that were being made that were just great and inspiring to me. And so it sort of rewoke that John Williams passion of mine by going, it was, and it wasn't John Williams, it was all these other composers, but it was like, oh yeah, that's what I wanted to do. I remember that kid from 7 years old, that thing that made his heart skip a beat. Let's do that, And so that really started my journey. Somewhere middle of music school, I kind of pivoted.
Yeah. So did you start scoring independent films, just kind of mock-up stuff? What was your first kind of step into that?
I would spend the weekends kind of writing imaginary scenes in my head,
Okay.
this type of cue or this type of scene or this. And so I started to just compile a pretty large demo of material. Of which I would use to then, because when music school wrapped up, and I well, now what? Which is probably the question most every kid asks themselves.
Yeah.
Well, I decided to apply to USC out in LA, and I used that reel, and I got in. I mean, I was amazed. I couldn't believe I got into USC, and that reel was, a huge reason why. Ultimately, right at the last minute is when I got offered to become a ghostwriter for Joseph LaDuca. And kind of like, it's not right, it's like an apprentice. So, to be one of his guys.
Yeah.
And that reel helped because he could see that I could write a lot of styles. What's that?
The Colonel.
Yeah. Yeah. He could see, hey, here's a kid that knows the gear. He can write a lot. He can clearly work fast. He's got a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's worth, taking a risk on. So that's kind of, it wasn't like I was scoring anything, but I in my head I was, and that was the music that he heard that he decided to give me a shot with.
Yeah. And what was that apprenticeship like for you? What did that look like?
It was awesome and exhilarating, but it was a grind. I mean, it was 80 to 120 hours a week.
Hmm.
I still have the logs, my calendars from that time together, because it was just so ridiculous, where I would write down every day what I did.
Yeah.
So, he's the composer that started with Sam Raimi on all the Evil Dead stuff. And so I was
I
already
didn't know that.
Yeah, so I was a horror film fanatic as a kid.
Mm.
And so then to go to work for him, I felt like I was working for someone who was really great in that genre. And he's
Right.
great in a lot of other genres. So it was just really exciting because I knew his work already, you
Yeah.
know? And so that apprenticeship was sort of like, it started as a programmer, as an engineer. Then it was like, well, hey, can you play
And you were
play on this
on site with him?
on site with
This
him?
was like pre-Zoom and pre.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, yeah. I mean, so I moved out and stayed in a friend's basement for months on end. And
It's
it
great.
was sort of like he gave me 2 weeks of work. He wanted me to reprogram a new synthesizer as a test to see if I could do it. And I
Right.
did it. And I did it well. And he was like, well, what if I give you this job? And it was some menial studio job. And I did it, and I did it well.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it was like, well, hey, can you play on this White Castle spot? Another writer needs a guitar player. So I play on the spot. It was like, oh, wow, you didn't suck.
Right.
And then it was like, well, could you do that? And so, it's like bit
Yeah.
by bit, you get a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, then you're like one of the team. And then
You're trusted.
Totally.
You're vetted.
Yeah.
You've figured it out. You've
Yeah.
landed on your feet.
Yeah.
half
And then
dozen
you're off
times.
and running. And
Yeah.
so then it was years of really being off and running, getting to work on a lot of fun shows, Xena and Hercules, which would go on to massive global success. And, I got to be a part of that stuff. So it was awesome. It was
That's
awesome.
nice. So let's talk about apprenticeships
Yeah.
for a minute, because they seem to have internships kind of have made apprenticeships go by the wayside.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that's the best. Like if a student really wants to learn and really is hungry and wants to prove him or herself, to me, the idea of working in the room with somebody on real world projects and not putting your foot in your mouth and not fumbling the ball is the absolute best way to show that you can figure it out and to be trusted.
Yeah. It's great.
Why do you think apprenticeships have kind of gone away?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. When you say that, do you differentiate between apprenticeship and internship? Do you look at them as two different buckets?
I mean, internship seems to be like, if I'm for a grade, I have to show up.
Yeah.
I'm
yeah.
going to punch the clock. Whereas apprenticeship is like, you're working on things with the person.
Yeah. I see what
working
you're
on
saying.
real projects.
Yeah.
Internships are like, okay, go clean the bathroom.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that certainly, I think, has to do with a product of colleges and music schools now becoming so involved in the music industry and creating a curriculum that is arguably better or more relevant or whatever it might be. And they then lock these sort of like school related internships to studios. But for me, and what I grew up with, since I had to chart my own path. I had to cut down, I had to cut through all of it, and I had to want it. I mean, I always say I bled for it. I gave up everything. I mean, people, they don't know. I mean, I skipped lunches because it was pay the rent or eat. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to pay the rent so I can hang in here. I can go without lunch.
Yeah.
Surely I can find some chips in the studio to munch on.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
absolutely.
And I think that's gone by the wayside.
Yeah.
And
you just scratch it out.
Yeah.
One way or another, you're going to figure it out.
I'm going to figure that. And I think that's what's been gone.
Yeah.
And that makes me sad, because you can tell there are such few people in any area of work that requires that scratch and claw that's being lost.
Yeah.
Yeah,
totally agree. So Jared, what have you been working on lately? What does your day-to-day look like?
Well, I just finished up There's one company I've worked with a long time called Brinkman Adventures. I just finished season 9 for them. I literally wrapped it 2 weeks ago, but I started Joan of Arc this past week,
Nice.
which is a Herculean undertaking.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a 10 episode thing.
Right.
And I'm still kind of like, I'm in the playing in the sandbox mode. That's what I
Right.
call it, where you're kind of creating and seeing what sticks and what works and sending it to the director. Do you like this? What do we,
Yeah.
and then once my sandbox time is done, that's kind of then when I go into like head down, bust out the work.
Yeah. And what does that look like for you, Jared? Because this is a group of supervisors, upcoming supervisors, working supervisors, and you're coming at it from a scoring composer producer perspective. So can you talk about kind of how you work with your directors or your supervisors? How do you get on the same footing? How do you get on the page?
Yeah.
What works for you? Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of directors or filmmakers kind of come from a different place and speaking a different language, different expectations. How do you do it?
Yeah. And I always say that I try to tell everybody that in the world of directing and producing, that like, you do not have to speak musical language.
Hmm.
I'm not interested in hearing you say the words crescendo and decrescendo. I don't care. What we want to talk about are things that we share in common, which is this sort of emotional quadrant of life.
Yeah.
That's what we need to have conversations about, So I always say I like to work with whoever it is, whether it's a director, a producer, a music supervisor, whatever it is, who is creatively invested in the project.
Right.
I like to know that they care as much as I do. That if to them they're just making donuts, and you know what I mean, and they're
Yeah.
just busting out product, I don't enjoy those relationships. I've worked with those relationships and I really struggle. I think because I'm such a relational guy when it comes to this stuff, I love talking to directors or writers or producers to really get in their heads, and we talk about characters and motives and
Yeah.
there's a lot of texting that goes on between me and the director on a regular basis of very short texts. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? As opposed to
Transactional.
yeah. And so that's what I would always say, man.
Mm-hmm.
For me, if I feel like a tool and not a team member,
Hmm.
I'm going to struggle to do my best.
Right.
And
And you work on a lot of long-term projects.
totally.
These aren't
Oh,
2-week
oh
turnaround
no, I
projects.
mean,
These are
like
like
Joan of Arc is going to be a 4 to 5 month gig. Robin Hood was a 6-month gig. I mean,
right.
and to say that, like, there was one I did that wasn't involved in that company where it was a 3-hour score, and when you're talking about a 3-hour score, that's a long time. 100 music
Mm-hmm.
cues, and they never once commented on any cue I would send. Daily, I'm sending cues, right? Here's the next one. Here's the next one. Never once did I hear anything of like, hey, I love that, or hey, I love when you did this, or hey, this isn't working. And at the end of it, they didn't even say thanks. It was just like checks in the mail.
Interesting.
And when I went on to win an award for the score, they didn't even like write me to congratulate me. Like I was a tool.
Right.
I was just a tool.
Transaction.
And
yeah.
It started to feel really ugly, and it was hard every day for me to go up the stairs and go to work and sort of do my best when it felt like, well, who even cares? I'm the only one holding myself to a high standard.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got to hold myself to that standard.
Right.
So I just like it when people are really invested,
Yeah. Do you find that that's harder? Everybody's distributed now and sending files all over the planet. You're not. Are you ever in the same room with them?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
No. No. In all my years, I think my years, I don't know if I've ever been, because even when I was doing all the horror stuff out of LA, I was in Nashville and they were in LA, and it was a couple of phone calls. So I mean, you don't have to be in the same room, but you can feel connected to people when you know that you can pick up the phone and they're going to pick it up,
Yeah. I love that. So your work process, you're working on long-term projects. You like to really understand not only the team you're working with, but the characters and their arcs. You talked about the sandbox.
Yeah, the sandbox is really important.
That's like your first start?
Well, you know what? It's funny because it took me a while to even, I think it takes a while for anybody to even figure out their best creative process.
Yeah.
I think it's important to say that no one will have the same identical process. And just because something works for you, it doesn't mean it's going to work for someone, even that you're mentoring or you're giving advice to. You kind of have to learn what works for you. And particularly, I learned it. Well, I think everybody learns most things the hard way, but like when I got my first horror film out of LA and I was 29, and I got a call from LA and they were like, "Hey, Jared, we've heard your music. We really like it. We have a film for you. It's going to arrive tomorrow.
Hmm.
It's going to be due in 2 weeks. You need to do it. Or if you want to do it, here, boom, 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 boom." And I said yes. And it was like, boom, 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 boom. It was just crazy. There was no time to play in the sandbox. There was only get it done.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they said, well, we're looking for a score like Bernard Herrmann. That was my direction. And it was like, see you in 2 weeks. And I did it and I survived it and I did okay. They liked it. They asked me back, but that was a hard process where there was no time to play in the sandbox. You're going with a gut instinct of like, well, I guess this is how I'm going to do it.
And they're totally hands off. They're not
totally. And this was frightening. I mean, oh my gosh. And it's sort of most movies aren't even made this way anymore. People are more, but it was like, we're looking for Bernard Herrmann. I sent them the main title of the show, the opening credit thing. They loved it. And they said, yes, do that. See you in 2 weeks. And so in 2 weeks, I'm delivering them a fully recorded mixed score for them to go to the dub stage. That is frightening.
Yeah.
Because you're like, well, how do I know?
Now why is that frightening? Because you don't have any guide rails through the project? I mean,
because it's sort of like, it's like the ship that sails. If you're sailing, say, from England to Massachusetts and you're 2 degrees off, the 2 degrees over time is going to add up to quite a distance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you're going to wind up in Florida.
Yeah.
And that's always my big, and that is a huge concern. And it has happened to me where I've gone 2 degrees off and what I deliver on the dub stage is not at all what they wanted.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. I notice a lot for the projects we're working on. There's kind of two roles. One is the person who's just kind of overly micromanaging.
Yes.
Wants to be involved in everything. Have a voice in everything.
Yeah.
And the second is, hand off, tell us what we need to do and we'll do it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
How do you work best? What is an appropriate level for a supervisor or a director how often do you want to hear from them?
Yeah, no, and that's a great question. That kind of goes into that whole thing of like your best and worst. Well, yeah, your best and worst experiences. And it's funny because my best and worst experiences would be the polars of someone leaving me alone for way too long and someone micromanaging me to the point where, I remember my first audio drama, which was a genre that I got into, was for The Secret Garden, which is this timeless, lovely story. But the producer, his notes to me about cues, it was like handcuffs. And it finally came to the point I was like, hey, dude.
Like he wanted to be the composer.
And I said, hey, dude, man, it seems like you would probably write this score much better and quicker than me. And because I was at the end of my rope where, every cue is getting rejected and revised. And you're like, you should write this because I don't know what, at this point.
Or maybe I'm not the guy for you. Maybe you need to find somebody else.
Totally. And fortunately, the guy above stepped in and backed him off. But that's really hard, man. For anybody who's really creative, micromanaging them is just going to shut them down.
Yeah.
And I know it, like for me, I think that a lot of now the people that I get to work with, they understand how I work and they kind of understand what makes me tick. And a lot of times they don't even give me notes anymore. They don't even call the cues because they even say, Jared, you've done things that I never would have expected. You've started a cue here. You did something here that I never would. And they're like, I love hearing your surprises.
Yeah.
And that's great.
Yeah.
But of course, the other route is that sort of 2 degrees off and you wind up in Florida. And for like one of the horror films that I did, that was the thing that happened where it's one of the worst horror movies of all times. Like, according to the ratings, I love it. It's called Ancient Evil Scream of the Mummy. Okay.
All right.
I did this thing in like 2000 or whatever. And the director, all he said to me was like, hey, I'm looking for a score like the Omen, Jerry Goldsmith Omen. And I was like, well, I know that score. I know that score like the back of my hand. But when I saw the film, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is nothing. This doesn't work. What you want and what you've made are not cohesive. And so I did a score that I felt was supporting the movie. Yeah. And he called me up after I delivered it and was like, this is awful. I hate this. I hate this score. And I was like, I think it works. Can you just give it a day? Give it a day. Go look at the film tomorrow and call me back. And he called me back and he was like, okay, I really like this. I like it. You're going to rewrite this cue. You're going to fix this. But you're right, Jared. It works. Yeah. But that's just a case of leaving someone alone way too long. You know, we don't need these kind of surprises when you're talking about deadlines like that.
So, Jared, going back to the work process, walk us through kind of a high level overview of what that looks like for you.
Yeah. And so, like I said, the way everybody kind of needs to find their own work process and how it takes time. I have a couple of mentors that I've had for many years, composers, arrangers, orchestrators. And one of them's here in town. His name is Carl Marsh, and he's arranged everything. I mean, my goodness, his credentials are amazing, but he's mentored me for 25 years. And I remember bringing him a theme I was working on for a show. And I said, hey, man, I could really just use your eyes on this. Do you have anything you could offer me to just help me look at it different? And he gave me that term, play in the sandbox. And he said, and that's when he said, Jared, you just really need to play in the sandbox on this. You need to take the pressure off yourself and just play around with the theme and have fun with it, do different things with it, see what you can do with it. Take the car out for a test drive, so to speak. But under sort of without the burden of attaching it to a scene. Just let's just write some music with this. You know what I mean? Play around. And that meeting I had with him really changed everything for me and how I work. And now I sort of build in this play in the sandbox time for me in the score. And that's kind of become part of when you work with me, you understand I've got some sandbox time, And so now, rather than just writing a scene and sending it off to the director and then writing the next scene, sending it off for approval, right? That's the way I used to do, is like, boom, boom,
you start, boom. You're starting the project.
Right. Now what I do is I kind of take the first act as a whole and I'll write this and then I'll go write this, and I'm not showing anybody. And I'm writing this. And then I'll listen to it all down and I'll see, well, how does this flow? How is this revealing the story? And I'll change this and I'll change that. You know what I mean? And then I'll go, okay, I have a really good first act.
Yeah.
I'm going to show the director the first act. And then it just feels like you can watch 15 to 20 minutes or listen to it and you go, this makes sense. Because I had time to play in the sandbox.
Yeah. That's brilliant. So that play time, the sandbox time, that kind of takes the pressure off. You're not really working. You're just kind of putzing around, trying things, experimenting, seeing where the surprises are.
Right. All of that.
Indulging yourself, trying some things, throwing stuff against the wall.
Right. And really being okay. Because like yesterday, very little music was written yesterday. But I played around for 8 hours. You know what I mean?
Right.
And my wife she's so good. My wife always talks me off the ledge. She's like, Jared, this is sandbox time. You're okay. This is what you do, but it's so important because you might find, and you always do find, you find the little thing that goes, aha, that's it. And I think that's what, unfortunately, I think that is getting lost. When we talk about things that are getting lost, the apprenticeships, the scratch and claw, we're learning about, I think what we're forgetting is it takes time to find something of value.
Right.
Whether that's making a record and finding the right drum part or the guitar part or getting the right vocal take, sometimes things take hours to find. And I can always hear when someone, I'm like, well, that seems like the first thing you thought of, and you didn't have the time, you didn't spend the time to iterate it, to make it better.
Yeah.
You didn't use it to build off of, well, what's the next best thing I can do. I mean, I always used to have this thing in the studio as a guitar player where I would be like, okay, that was a good take. I'm going to try to beat it. I'm going to try to beat it. I always try to beat the take. And once I couldn't beat the take, then that's the take. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's sort of me with writing of like, okay, that's cool. Can I beat it? Can I beat it? And I think we live in such an instant gratification culture that they don't have the time. They're not affording, they haven't learned how to grind 8 hours out for maybe 10 seconds of music, but that 10 seconds is the gold that's going to propel you for the rest of the thing.
Yeah, 100%. It's more like transactional rather than transformational.
Yeah.
It's not just about doing the job. It's about creating the thing that makes people feel like they're flying, you know, lifts them off the ground and kind of like connects to that thing in humans that makes people care.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's the drum sound that you'll hear. Oh my gosh, they took 20 hours to get that snare drum.
Right.
You're like, that's a great record. And we keep listening to that record. Or, you know, the iconic sound from like Hellraiser, when the box, that sound of the box, you're like, you know what, that sound didn't get written in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That was
the sound of George Lucas's TIE fighters with the screaming tiger. You know what I mean? Like that sound designer had to play around forever to get that. And now look what the sound of the lightsaber has become one of the most iconic sounds because they didn't take the cheap way out.
Right.
You know,
they kept the bar high. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Jared, when you talk about the sandbox, how much of that shows up in the actual project? You know, 20% of that, 50% of that?
Yeah, for me, maybe 50% of it does.
Okay.
Maybe half of it. Sometimes I have sometimes I get these amazing surprises where I'll write something, 10, 15 bars, 20 bars, and I'll go, you know what? I'm just going to throw this over the scene. Let's just see. And you're like, wow, I cannot believe that works. Those are the most, you know, maybe you're like, well, I got to add a bar, I got to add a beat to hit a time, but you're like, I can't believe this works. This is so good. You know, and those are those happy moments of your life where it's just everything is just like, oh, this is so worth it. I love this job. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
So yeah, I'd say half of it, you know, but the other half is just so important for development because you learn something about the music that you can do with it, you know?
Jared, when you're working with a younger 20-something talented kid, what advice would you give them? How would you steer them? Obviously the world's changed a lot in 20 years, but what kind of advice do you give them?
Yeah. You know, there's a piece of advice that I wish someone would have given me at 29 when I started to break into the horror film thing and I started to get a lot of calls. But I was also simultaneously working in the CCM Christian music scene in Nashville too, getting asked to arrange and produce and play on those records. So I was kind of holding these two worlds because I just needed to make a living. I was just scratching and clawing trying to pay
horror
bills.
Music and CCM music.
It's awesome. Is it
somehow? Look, I know both worlds, and somehow that makes sense to me.
Well, it's just that dichotomy is amazing, isn't it? But I was just trying to make a living, right? So I'm just like, I'm going to try to do everything and just see what sticks. Okay. The point being, though, was that I had just done a horror film in LA, my first one. I did it well. They liked me. But I was also contracted to arrange and produce a record for the CCM world. Yeah. And this was a big job. The money was fine. The money was good enough. But then the horror company called me with the next installment of the Puppet Master series. And the Puppet Master series, you know, hey, that's a real honest to goodness horror franchise.
Yeah.
And I turned it down because I was too busy. I couldn't make it work. And that was the biggest mistake of my career. And I wish someone would have said, Jared, anyone can do the CCM record. You can subcontract that out. I'm telling you, you can hire anybody in this town. They're going to manage it and go do the horror film. You need to focus on the big goal.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I would say that to anybody, whatever your job is within this film music industry, is take the work and figure out how to do it. Subcontract it out. Build a team of people below you, even if they're not like, say, your employees.
Yeah.
They're at least people that you know and really trust that you vetted that, you know, if you get busy, you can farm it to them and they're going to do a great job,
Yeah.
you know?
Is the advice then don't say no to anything?
Well,
Or is the, because like when you're 25 starting out, it's like you maybe you don't know your true north or your true destination, right?
oh yeah, you say yes. I mean, at 25, you
I
say
mean,
yes to everything. I believe that. You say yes to everything.
mhm,
And at 29, I should have said yes to everything. But in my mind, I was one person that had a finite amount of time, that could only
right.
do a finite amount of work. I wasn't thinking about myself as a business, so to
Yeah,
speak. I wasn't, and I just wasn't thinking, you know?
right. You're working in your business, not on your business, as they say.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so, at that age, at 25, of course, I'd say yes to everything. Now, as you get
yeah,
older, I do say no to things. There are things that I kind of have this saying of like, I want to, now at this phase of my life, if it's a baseball analogy of like, if you hit the baseball on the right part of the bat, the ball is going out of the park.
hmm,
But if you hit it on the wrong part of the bat, it's just a weak grounder. And I need to do things in my life now where I am hitting it always on the good part of the bat.
yeah,
You know, that's just, my time is limited. Anything I do, if it's a friendship or if it's a volunteer thing, it needs to be a sweet spot that I can crush,
right.
you
You
know,
want to set yourself up for success.
success. Yes, in whatever that might be.
Yeah,
And so I'm quicker to say, this is not a great fit for me, but I can
hmm,
probably tell you someone that might be,
yeah.
you know.
And what are some of those things that you would say potentially say no to?
Well,
Like
certainly if I
it's
realize I'm a tool, you know what I
right.
mean, and not a team member, um, unless there's a gaping hole in my schedule and it makes sense that I just need to be a tool and suck it up, I guess I'll
Mhm.
be a tool. But if it's just normal workflow, I might just say, you know what, I just know this isn't going to be good for me. It's not good for my wife. It's not good for my kids. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
And so that's normally it. What would be the no is just to know how I'll be viewed within the whole process.
so it's more like a team role. It's
Yeah,
not really a an ability or a capacity role. It's
yeah,
like
yeah. I mean, yeah, it's not really an ability thing. I certainly now, no offense to CCM, but I would never take that work. It doesn't interest me. And I
yeah,
realized very quickly that, because I mean, the funny thing with CCM work was everything I did would get canned by the producer. It was too risky. It was too aggressive. It was,
yeah,
we don't do it. And so I've also realized that if a piece of music came, or a project came my way and I realized it was so creatively stifling and so vanilla,
right.
I'd probably be like, I'm not the guy,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, we're the same way. It's like if it's disposable music, we're not the right
I'm
people
not the
for
right
you.
guy.
It's
There's so many
there's
disposable music
yeah,
composers. You
yeah.
can find them, and more power to them. And I kind of am jealous of the people that can do disposable music. Sometimes I wish I didn't care so much,
Hmm,
you know.
yeah.
But I do.
So what else for a 23-year-old female scoring composer? What other advice would you give them? You said don't say no to anything. That was a
Don't
big
say,
one.
yeah.
What else? What other advice could you?
Um, I think I think understanding like story, power of story, the role
Mm,
of story. I think coming to grips that this project is not all about you, the composer. It's not, you're not here to glorify yourself. You're a support role,
mhm,
but you can have an artistic statement amidst being a support role. You know what I
mhm,
mean? You can satisfy both, but always remember the story comes first. And so I don't really care that you wrote this amazing fugue or have this amazing classical technique that you've worked in here to the scene. If it's not working, it's not working. You know what I
mhm.
mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So I would say, to anybody on any level of whether it's a composer or the music supervisor, is understand story,
Mm,
understand why something works. Look at the movies you like, the scenes that you like, whether it was the use of a pop track, um, like in the new Top Gun Maverick movie where they use pop music and it's so good. Why do I
right.
like this? What's the tempo? What's the pacing? What's it make me feel? Why is it working? The
Yeah.
score, why is this working? Really have an arsenal of stuff that you can draw upon so that when you're faced with a scene and as a supervisor and you're like, well, what kind of pop track am I looking for? You can think back to this library in your head of, I remember how I felt when I saw that movie. Why does that track work so well?
Mm-hmm.
And then it would help you interface with artists to know exactly what you're looking for. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
love
not
that.
wasting artists' time, whether they're trying to write a song for your movie. And now you've got, at least you've got some guardrails over what you're looking for, because you've got this database in your head of what you like and what works.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. So, Jared, we talk a lot inside the community about getting work, like taking on those first projects, don't overthinking things, don't overthink things, just kind of, like you said, say yes to everything. What kind of advice would you give to somebody, who's taken on their, how do you get your first gig?
Man,
What kind of things would you put in their head to encourage them to take on projects?
yeah. I think the realization that it it takes getting your first gig, and getting any gig, but getting your first gig and getting those early gigs, the amount of no's that I've had in my life. If and I think anybody who's made a living in music or in any field would say this. You can't even fathom the amount of no's I've had. And I don't even get a no. I mean, it's just radio silence.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, we're talking hundreds to one. I mean, we're hundreds to one. I mean, you know
Right.
what I mean? And that's okay. And it
Mm.
doesn't mean you stink. It doesn't mean you don't have something to offer. It's just the way it is. And don't lose heart and keep grinding. There's nothing wrong with you. That's what I would say. And I'm kind of amazed sometimes that, and I was young. I didn't have a family and I could live cheap, and I was willing to be poor. I was willing to kind of do it all
Right.
to get the gig. But I'm amazed that, like, emotionally I had the strength to keep going.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That
And
I look,
not care about the
yeah,
no's or the
or
rejections. It's like, I'm gonna figure it out. I'm going
I'm,
forward.
yeah, I could only care so much. I'd have to move on. I
Right.
gotta, I gotta keep forward motion. I've got to make the next phone call. I've got to write the next email. I've got to go to the next meet and greet. I've got to do whatever it is. I'm going to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would just say that is like, just don't lose heart, you know?
Right. Yeah. I love that. So, what are some gaps that you've seen younger students, young professionals have that people often miss? How can you point out some gaps for people and say, "Hey, think about this. Pay attention to this.
Yeah.
You're missing this."
Yeah. That's a great question. And it's funny because, sadly, um, so many people don't heed advice
Right.
when they ask me for advice. Um, and it's funny because, man, as a kid, for me, I soaked up everything. If I went to someone that was making a living in music, I was all ears. Tell me what
Right.
you're doing.
Yeah.
How are you doing this? Tell me what I need to change.
Let me
You know what I mean?
listen. Yeah.
Oh man. I mean, I just, and I, what I've noticed a lot are they're more interested sort of in the digital persona of how they're perceived than the skill set that they have. Um, that they can make themselves look successful, look like they're working, look like they're important
Take the picture on the big console.
on the big console. With take the picture with the right person,
Yeah.
whatever, but not really have the skills needed. Because when you get the job, like I'm telling you, you wrote, yes, that's a pretty cool piece of music you wrote, but I'm telling you, you haven't learned how to iterate it to
Mm.
make it 90 minutes of music. Do you know what
Mm.
I mean?
Yeah.
You haven't done the hard work of learning your craft.
Mm.
And I'm telling you, they're going to shine the light on you one day, and you're not going to be able to deliver the goods.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
The 10,000 hours of just putting
You
in the
gotta
reps.
there is no microwave
Right.
version of this career. 10,000 hours is a real thing. I mean,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
it
It's
is.
fun. It's funny. It's like people look for shortcuts and TikTok and blah, nothing against social media. There's a place for
Yeah.
social media, but what we're interested in is competing at a higher level and not winning a lottery, not, getting signed to a label. You get signed to a label when you don't need a label. So you're competing at such a level that you're bumping up against the greatest artists in the world. It's like
Yeah.
that's a career that you want. You don't want an American Idol 30
Yeah.
record deal with you know, you want to build your business. We go back to the idea of working on your business, not in your business. Yes,
Yeah.
you have to be great at what you do, but you also have to build the infrastructure, the e-commerce, the team building, those kind of things. Artists just sometimes miss that kind of platform building under their music. And I think what you're saying is ignore some of the noise, ignore the brand building, if you will, for composer producers, and just build muscle, put in the reps, get great at something rather than, look popular. Is that a fair?
Yeah. I mean, and there's obviously a time and a place to market yourself. And I'm not very good at that. I've always struggled with that. I've always been, for me, the whole thing was my whole motive of why you're doing, besides why I love it, was I didn't want the people I admire to think I sucked. I just, and even if I never met them, I wanted them to say,
that's
yeah,
it.
He's good. He's good.
Who are those people? Let's put a face to three of those. I mean, because I think that's an important psychological anchor you just described there.
Oh, it is. I mean, it's crazy.
You're saying all these voices don't matter except for these three people.
But it's funny because some voices, some voices do matter, right? Like for me, Peter Gabriel was a voice in my head. Would Peter think this was a cool
idea? Mount Rushmore people?
Yeah, it's this. That is the only. It's the only. John Williams is a Mount Rushmore guy. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Daniel Lanois as a producer, right? I mean, those kind of people. So I cut, like what I did is I cut out all the noise, except for the 1%. That's the noise that matters to me. And like I remember when I mixed a record at Michael Omartian's studio. I mixed a score there once, and I mixed like a pop world record that I did there. And when Michael was hanging down for the whole mix, wanting to hear everything, and he was like, "You're a really good guitar player, man." Like, that's my 1%.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Michael would certainly be actually one of the 1% as a producer, as a player, as an arranger. You know what I mean? So I think it's sort of like, for me, I can't listen to all the noise. If I listen to all the noise, I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to always second guess myself. I'm going to lose what my intuition is telling me to do. I'm going to get depressed, or I'm going to get critical, right? But if I just stay here, I'm going to be okay.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I love that. That's an important way to think. The Mount Rushmore of your influences. It's like, look, Daniel Lanois is very different from what you do, but yet still there's this fiber that you're talking about. It's the constitution of a Daniel Lanois that you're connected to, and that, like, hey, I want to impress this guy, not because we sound alike, but because we approach music in the same way, and we hold the bar high.
Right. And I think you can do that with any skill set within the film industry. Is who are the best music supervisors? Well, why are they the best? Who are the best producers and directors? And why did Steven Spielberg make amazing movies? And why have some of these other movies, they just fall flat and they just feel like cardboard? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
100%. Know the 1% that you want to look for, and just stay focused on that.
Yeah. I love that. Well, Jared, this was great, man. I appreciate you joining us on this conversation.
Absolutely, John.
Yeah. And what's the best way if somebody wants to reach out to you? How can people get in touch with you?
Man, I love hearing from people. I always say that my studio is open to anybody. My time, I try to make time for anybody up and coming. My website has a contact information page, and you can, it'll go right to my inbox, and I'll see it, and I'll respond.
What's the URL for the website?
Just JaredDePasquale.com.
Okay. And we'll include that in the SEO information under the video.
Yeah, cool. I love hearing from people. Seriously, any questions, any way I can help out the next generation, I am totally in.
Great, Jared. And let me ask you this. If there is a talented 20 something young Jared out there, would you be willing to take 45 minutes to meet with them and listen to what she's doing?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Great. Great. We may,
Well, and because the reality is like I'm looking to build a team of people. And when I say a team, I'm not talking about employees, but like there are moments where I've looked at my wife and I think if this all comes down at the same time, I can't do it, but I
right.
can't say no. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I am looking for, well, who are the people then that I could partner with
And
that
trust.
could keep
Yeah.
my brand high and provide a good score. You know what I mean?
Love that.
Yeah.
Great. Jared, thanks so much, man. This was a
Yeah,
great
man.
conversation.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate you
Absolutely.
taking the time, man.
Loved it. Thanks so much,
All right.
Jared.
See you,
See you
dude.
soon.
Bye.